They say grief brings out the truth in people, but sometimes it reveals the lies you didn't even know you were living with. It started like any other Tuesday morning. I was folding laundry, half listening to a true crime podcast, when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something in my gut told me to answer. "Mrs. Morrison?" a man asked. His tone was clipped, official. "This is Charles Henderson, your father-in-law's attorney. I'm calling to inform you that Frank Morrison has left you the estate on Maple Drive, along with all its contents and financial assets." I sat frozen, a damp towel hanging limply from my hand. "I'm sorry, can you repeat that?" I said. He did, word for word. The family estate, antique furniture, investment portfolio, classic car collection. All of it, left to me. Not to David, Frank's only son. Not to the man who had carried his name, his expectations, and his grudges for 35 years. Me, the daughter-in-law he could barely look at during Sunday dinners. The woman he'd once said didn't seem like family material. I dropped the phone, and it hit the hardwood floor with a dull thud. My heart was racing. I couldn't tell if it was shock, panic, or some strange form of validation. After all, these years, why me? I found David in the kitchen, like always. He was stirring sugar into his coffee, his sacred ritual. 2 cups, 3 sugar cubes, never cream. It was like muscle memory for him, comforting and predictable. "The lawyer called," I said slowly. "Your father left the house to me." He didn't respond at first, just kept stirring. Then the spoon slipped. The cup shattered against the tile. "That's not possible," he said flatly, his face pale. "He would never. He hated you." He wasn't wrong. Frank had always been cold. I was the outsider, the casserole bringer, the one who hovered in the background of family photos. So why had he handed me everything? "The will is being read tomorrow at 2 p.m., I said. David said nothing, but that night he didn't sleep. He paced our bedroom like an animal trapped in a cage, whispering theories to himself. Maybe the medication messed with his mind. Maybe someone influenced him. He was unraveling, and I was starting to realize, whatever this inheritance was, it came with a storm I hadn't prepared for. The following morning, the air was thick with tension as we entered Mr. Henderson's office. The walls, lined with dark mahogany panels, seemed to close in on us, and the faint smell of old leather and dust filled the room. It felt like stepping into a scene from an old detective movie. Quiet, somber, and filled with unspoken truths. David sat beside me, his leg bouncing nervously, hands clenched tightly on his knees. The usually confident man looked like a trapped animal. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, and began to read the will aloud with a calm but firm voice. To my daughter-in-law, Sarah Morrison, who showed me more genuine kindness in 8 years than my own son has in 35. I leave the house at 1247 Maple Drive and all its contents, including my investment portfolio, currently valued at $1.2 million. The room fell into a heavy silence, as if those words had shattered something fragile between us. David suddenly sprang to his feet, his voice rising sharply. This can't be right. My father was confused. He was sick. Sarah must have manipulated him during those visits after his stroke. I met his furious gaze without flinching. I remembered every lonely Tuesday afternoon I'd spent with Frank, helping him eat when David claimed he was too busy, reading mystery novels aloud when David said hospitals made him uncomfortable, and sitting with him during chemotherapy, sessions when David said he couldn't bear to see his father weak. "I just visited him," I said softly. David's face twisted in rage. "We're contesting this. I won't let her get away with stealing what's rightfully mine." Mr. Henderson's eyes never left David. "There is one more thing," he said calmly. From a drawer, He pulled out a sealed envelope. "Your father left this letter for you to find if there was ever a dispute. He wanted to be absolutely clear." David's hands trembled as the lawyer scanned the contents. His expression darkened as he read through the letter's careful, deliberate words. "This letter," Mr. Henderson said slowly, "explains in detail why your father chose his daughter-in-law over his own son." David turned ghostly pale, unable to meet my eyes. The letter lay unopened on the polished desk. David didn't ask to read it aloud. The weight of its contents hung heavily in the air, and for once, there was nothing left to say. That evening, the atmosphere in our home shifted in a way I never could have predicted. David's usual calm and composed demeanor shattered, revealing a side of him I had never seen before. Cold, desperate, and ruthless. He paced back and forth in the living room like a wild animal trapped in a cage, his hands clenched into fists, his jaw tight with frustration. The man I had loved and trusted for 8 years seemed like a stranger, replaced by someone consumed with anger and greed. Every word he spoke felt like a blow. "You're going to sign that house over to me tomorrow," he said with a voice low and menacing. "No arguments. That property and everything in it belongs to me. You have no right to keep it." His eyes were wild, filled with a dangerous intensity I hadn't seen before. Dad wanted me to have it. He must have been confused when he made that will. I stood firm, refusing to back down. "David, your father was clear. He trusted me, not you. I'll fight this, every step of the way. You won't get a single dollar without a battle." My voice was steady, but inside, my heart was pounding, with a mixture of fear and determination. This wasn't just about money or a house. This was about my dignity, my future, and the truth that had been buried beneath years of lies. The night dragged on in a haze of tension. Sleep was impossible. At 2:17 a.m., I woke to an eerie silence. The soft glow of a laptop caught my eye from the living room. Quietly, I crept closer and saw David hunched over the screen, fingers flying over the keyboard. On the screen was a digital copy of Frank's will, but the name Sarah Morrison was crossed out and replaced with his own. My blood ran cold. The man I thought I knew was willing to go to any length, even forgery, to claim what wasn't rightfully his. Couldn't believe the depths he'd sink to. This wasn't just desperation. It was calculated deceit. I thought back to all the times I had stood by Frank during his illness, to the countless afternoons I spent nursing him when David was nowhere to be found. And now, David wanted to erase all that, rewrite history for his own gain. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This was no longer just a family dispute. It was a calculated attack, a dangerous game with everything on the line. David's greed had consumed him, and I was the last obstacle in his path. But I wasn't about to give up without a fight. I promised myself then and there that I would protect what was mine and expose the truth, no matter the cost. The next morning, the tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife. David avoided my gaze completely, but the bitterness in the air was unmistakable. I could see the battle raging behind his eyes, the desperation to claim the inheritance and the fear of losing it. I knew I had to be careful. Every word, every move mattered. Later that day, I received a call from Mr. Henderson, the family lawyer. "Mrs. Morrison," he said cautiously, "there's something else your father left behind. Something important." My heart skipped a beat. What could it be? He told me about a sealed envelope Frank had entrusted to him months before his death, specifically warning that it should only be opened if the will was contested. The lawyer sounded grave, and I could tell this was more than just a legal formality. That evening, as David sat brooding in the corner, I called Mr. Henderson to arrange a meeting. The following day, In the lawyer's mahogany-paneled office, the tension was palpable. Mr. Henderson carefully opened the envelope and began reading aloud. The letter was from Frank himself, explaining his decision to leave everything to me. He spoke of the kindness I had shown during his final years, how I had cared for him when his own son chose to distance himself. More than that, the letter detailed the deep disappointment he felt toward David's neglect and entitlement. David's face twisted with fury as the letter was read. "This is a lie," he shouted. "Dad would never say those things. This is all fake." But Mr. Henderson was resolute. "Your father was of sound mind when he made this will. This letter is his final wish." I looked at David and saw a man unraveling. The mask of the loving son was gone, replaced by raw anger and fear. I realized that this fight was far from over. David's threats were more than empty words. He was prepared to go to extreme lengths to overturn the will, and I had to be ready to stand my ground. But beneath the anger, there was a sad truth. A father's love lost, a son's bitterness, and a daughter-in-law caught in the crossfire. As I left the office that day, I knew that this was not just a battle for a house. It was a reckoning for the fractured family and a test of my own strength. That night, the house felt colder than I'd ever remembered. The shadows seemed longer, and every creak echoed louder in the silence. David barely spoke a word, but his presence was like a dark storm brewing, ready to break loose. I kept replaying the lawyer's words over and over in my mind, how Frank's letter revealed everything with brutal clarity. But David's silence wasn't calm. It was heavy with anger, and something darker beneath the surface. I knew this wasn't going to end quietly or peacefully. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by the faint glow of light coming from the study. I crept down the hallway, careful not to make a sound, and peeked inside. David was hunched over his laptop, his fingers flying furiously across the keyboard as if trying to erase the truth itself. On the screen, I saw a forged version of the will. His name had been carefully typed where mine had been. My heart slammed against my ribs. This wasn't just a fight over inheritance anymore. It was turning into a dangerous game of deceit and desperation. Swallowing my fear, I confronted him quietly. "David, you don't realize how far this can go. Forging legal documents? That's serious. You could end up in jail." His eyes flashed cold and hard, like a predator ready to strike. "I don't care about jail. That house is mine by right, and I'll do whatever it takes to prove it." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. The man I married was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. From that moment, the days that followed were a nightmare. Every phone call was a battle, every conversation laced with threats and accusations. David was relentless, pushing legal boundaries and trying to bully me into giving up. He even showed up at my work one afternoon, demanding I hand over the house keys. But every time he tried to intimidate me, it only made me stronger. I started gathering my own evidence. I reached out to neighbors who had seen me caring for Frank during his final months. I collected medical bills, hospital records, even photos of the afternoons I spent reading to him and helping with his treatments, things David had ignored or refused to do. I also hired a sharp lawyer, someone who believed in the truth and was ready to take this battle all the way to court if needed. But this fight was no longer just about the house. It was about standing up to betrayal, exposing lies, and demanding respect. Frank had made his choice clear in his final days, and I was determined to honor that, no matter the cost. Each night, I reminded myself why I was fighting. Not just for money or property, but for justice and the truth that David was desperate to hide. I knew the road ahead would be long and grueling, full of obstacles and painful confrontations. But I was ready. I had to be. Because some battles are about more than possessions. They're about reclaiming your dignity and standing tall when the people you trusted try to tear you down. The moment David realized I wasn't backing down, he escalated everything. The lawyer immediately sent a formal challenge to the will's legitimacy, claiming Frank had been mentally incompetent when he signed it. But I knew the truth. Frank was sharp, clear-headed, and fully aware when he made his decision. To fight back, I gathered every piece of evidence I could find. Medical records proving his sound mind, testimonies from nurses and friends who had visited him regularly, and detailed notes from the times I personally cared for him. I was determined to expose the lies and defend Frank's final wishes. The courtroom felt cold and unforgiving. David sat across from me with his jaw clenched, eyes burning with anger and disbelief, as if he couldn't grasp losing what he believed was his birthright. The judge listened patiently as our lawyers presented their cases. My attorney was sharp and methodical, dismantling every baseless accusation David's team threw at us. This battle was no longer just about property. It had become a war for honor, respect, and truth. The tension in the room was palpable, with every word and gesture carrying years of betrayal and pain. Outside the courtroom, whispers began swirling throughout the neighborhood. Some sided with David, convinced that blood ties trump everything. Others quietly supported me, respecting the strength it took to fight back. The hardest part was facing David himself, the man who once promised to be my partner, but was now my fiercest opponent. Every encounter crackled with old wounds and shattered trust. He tried intimidation, veiled threats, even pleading behind closed doors, but I remained steadfast. Despite the emotional toll, I refused to let fear or anger control me. My focus was on honoring Frank's memory and protecting what was rightfully mine. The trial dragged on with endless depositions, meetings, and sleepless nights spent preparing our case. But with each passing day, I grew stronger and more resolute. This was bigger than a house. It was about reclaiming my dignity and closing a chapter filled with lies. Unexpectedly, I found allies where I least expected. Friends, neighbors, and even some distant family members who had witnessed Frank's kindness to me reached out with support. It was a reminder that true loyalty isn't always about blood. It's about those who stand by you when it matters most. As the final hearing approached, I felt a quiet confidence, ready to face whatever came next and prove that justice can prevail, even in the darkest moments. The day of the final hearing arrived, heavy with tension and nervous anticipation. The courtroom was packed with family, friends, and curious onlookers, all waiting to see how this bitter dispute would finally be resolved. David sat rigidly in his chair, his usual confident facade replaced by a nervous tension. Every eye in the room was on him, waiting for his reaction as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. When the judge finally spoke, a hush fell over the room. The ruling confirmed that Frank's will was valid and legally binding. Every word, every decision Frank made in his final months was upheld. The estate, the sprawling Victorian house on Maple Drive, the antique furniture, the rare car collection, and the sizable investment portfolio was legally mine. David's desperate attempts to challenge the will, including his forgery, were exposed and rejected by the court, forever damaging his credibility. The courtroom erupted with whispered shock and murmurs of disbelief. For me, it was a moment of profound relief and quiet victory after years of struggle. But the real journey was just beginning. Walking into the house as its rightful owner for the first time was surreal. The old wooden floors creaked beneath my feet, each room carrying echoes of memories both painful and comforting. I wandered slowly, touching the faded wallpaper, gazing at the antique furniture Frank had cherished. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a symbol of truth finally emerging from years of lies and betrayal. As I stood in the sunlit living room, I realized that this home was a fresh start, a place where honesty and kindness could finally grow. David faded from my life soon after the verdict. The man who had been consumed by greed and anger retreated, knowing the fight was lost. His betrayal severed the last ties we had. Meanwhile, I dedicated myself to restoring the house and healing the wounds that had long been hidden beneath its grand facade. Every renovation project, every small victory in making this house a true home, felt like reclaiming a part of my dignity and strength. In those moments, I felt closer to the man Frank had been, someone who had recognized my worth beyond blood and resentment. This experience taught me invaluable lessons about family, loyalty, and resilience. Family is not defined solely by blood or inheritance, but by the people who stand by you in your darkest moments. Sometimes you have to fight fiercely, not just to claim what is rightfully yours, but to protect your dignity and your truth. The legacy Frank left me was far greater than money or property. It was a testament to courage, integrity, and love, values that no amount of betrayal can ever erase.